I know self-publishing's not for everyone. Nothing is. But if you've considered self-publishing for even a minute, listen up, because I'm betting I know what's holding you back from exploring it further or getting started. Number one, you think the self-publishing process is a lot harder than it actually is. And number two, you're understandably afraid of doing it, air quote, wrong. So I've created a new free resource for you. It's called the Self-Publishing Starter Kit, and you can get instant access to it by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101. In this free training, you'll discover the exact 4 steps to focus on and mistakes to avoid so you can publish an incredible book that's indistinguishable in quality from a New York Times bestseller without overthinking, overguessing, or overspending in areas that won't make a difference. Again, visit publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101 to get instant access. Welcome to the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lyons. I'm a 6-time author and book editor, and I help people write and publish powerful, thought-provoking, wildly entertaining books without any more overthinking, second-guessing, or overwhelm than absolutely necessary. Because let's face it, some overthinking, second-guessing, and overwhelm is going to come with the territory if you're anything like me. I believe that story and shared perspective are 2 of the most potent ways we connect with one another, and that your story, perspective, and insights are destined to become someone else's favorite resource or pastime. For more book writing and publishing tips and solutions, and plenty of free and low-cost resources, visit publishaprofitablebook.com. And for recommendations of fabulous books you've possibly never heard of, book writing inspiration, and the occasional meme so relatable you'll wonder if it was created with you in mind, follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth Lyons Author. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I have become slightly fascinated with essays, short stories, chapterettes, vignettes. I've heard them categorized in all manner of ways. But the reason I've become fascinated with them is because I've kind of fallen in love with them. The very first book like this, well, I won't say the very first. One of the most recent firsts in this genre that I read was I Miss You When I Blink by Mary Laura Philpott. And I don't remember exactly how I found out about Mary. I think I was involved in some sort of a workshop where she was a panelist. Like maybe it was a webinar type thing, and she was speaking, and I just thought she was great. So I grabbed her book, and I just loved the fact that I could read one thing and I didn't have to read the next thing. The sad thing was I felt compelled to read, not the sad thing, but it was sad for my bedtime. I felt compelled to read the next thing, but I didn't feel this pressure of like a big book that I needed to get through. I saw it as something I could just take one essay at a time. And the one I read after that was You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith, which is just incredible. And then I was recently lucky enough to get my hands on an advanced copy of The Goodbye Process from Mary Jones, which is coming out in like 2 weeks. It's at the end of July 2024 with Zibby Books. And once again, I started in and it's like you think, okay, it's only 3 pages, so I'll just read this one story. But then you get so drawn in, not even to a storyline, because you know the next one's probably going to be slightly different, but it's like, well, now I want to read this one too. And so before I knew it, I was 75 pages in and 2 hours past my bedtime. I am not the fastest reader because I like to really savor the words in most cases. So I was really excited to get the opportunity to chat with Mary about the short story, essay, vignette, chapterette, whatever process. A lot because it's spoken about often how difficult it is or how much longer it can take or both to sell essays, stories, vignettes. And so for those committed to going the traditional route, they might have to have even a stronger mindset of patience and persistence. But man, when you can get your hands on a book like this, it is so worth it. no matter how it's released into the world. So for those of you who are sitting on a book of essays, chapters, vignettes, whatever, and you're sick and tired of waiting for the traditional route to work for you, please consider another route. And I say that selfishly. Please consider it for those of us who want to read what you've written, like yesterday. Mary's stories and essays have appeared in many journals, including Electric Literature's Recommended Reading, Subtropics, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Hopkins Review, Epiphany, Brevity, and others. She is the recipient of a summer prose fellowship from the University of Arizona Poetry Center, and her work has been cited as notable in the Best American Essays and appeared in the Best Microfiction 2022. She has an MFA from Bennington College and teaches fiction writing at UCLA Extension. This conversation was so much fun. I know you're going to love it. Everything there is to know and follow about Mary is in the show notes. Let's dive right into the conversation. I don't know if you saw, I think I posted on, or I messaged you, or I posted on Facebook or Instagram. I am in love with this book.
Oh, you are? Thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear
and
that.
I'll tell you, I have a question for you. I have many questions for you, but one of them is, so I don't historically read like vignettes, chapterettes, essay, memoir and essay type things. And one of the first places where I got into it was Mary Laura Philpott.
She read her.
Oh my
what
goodness.
Book is that?
Okay, she wrote a collection of essays called I Miss You When I Blink.
Oh,
and she had me at the title.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll have to check it out.
Isn't that funny? Sometimes we've heard of the author, but not the book. And sometimes we've heard of the book, but not the author. Anyway, another topic. But so I had gotten I Miss You When I Blink and I loved it. And then I thought, okay, maybe I do kind of like this. And then I read You Could Make This Place Beautiful.
Oh, yes.
Which is a similar, it's not really essays per se, but it's just a similar kind of approach. And so I was so excited to get this. And I was so excited by the premise of it. And I got so excited when I read the one about Bo and Hope.
Oh, yeah.
Like that was a pivotal moment for all Days of Our Lives fans.
It's so funny that you're calling it that. The one about Bo and Hope.
Yes, the Bo and Hope. And I was reading it and I was taking myself back to kind of not where I was thinking, where was I? And I don't know. I don't know which house I was in or how old. When was it? It was like it's probably the 90s, right?
I feel like it was probably the 80s.
Was it the 80s?
I think that goes way back. Did you watch Days of Our Lives as a kid?
Okay, so not so much as a kid because I wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
But I don't remember when I started watching it. But once I started watching it, it was game over.
No, it was so good back then.
Every day, 1:00. Did you watch it? Like
it was I arranged my college schedule so I could be home. I had to be home at 1:00 to see Days.
That was the thing because we didn't have like I don't even think we had VCR. I mean, we had VCRs, but I didn't have one in my dorm or anything. So it was, you had to be there. It was very, very important.
I know, and especially if somebody was coming back from the dead or something, you had.
Oh my God! Right? What was the Kyriakis? Right? He was always coming back from Stefano. Yes. Okay, we're going to make this the Days of Our Lives show, but So anyway, that just hooked me immediately, and I think that's so interesting because there will always be something different that hooks some different people that you won't even anticipate.
Yeah.
Have you always been a short, a vignette type writer?
Yeah, I love the short story form. I think it was kind of how I fell in love with writing and why I wanted to become a writer. I just love the brevity. I love how concise short stories are. I love seeing sort of just a glimpse in somebody's life and understanding the whole thing. So I'm just so impressed by the short story form. I like, how compact they are. And I just love short stories. It's really
what it is that is sort of counterintuitive about them is I think as the reader, you think, oh, like I'll look and I'll go, it's 3 pages. I'll read this one and then I'll go to bed. And then I read that one and then I have to read, and I'm like, okay, the next one's only 4 pages. So I'll read that and then I'll go to bed. And before I know it, I'm halfway through the book.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad that it had that effect.
It's marvelous. The one I
Good.
just finished was the one about the two girls who were, I don't want to give anything away, but the
Uh-huh.
two girls who I think it's called Absences.
Oh, yes. That's the one with the Days of Our Lives reference. Yeah.
It is. Oh, it is. It
Yes.
starts Absences.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you're
Yeah.
correct. And so the way that wove together was really beautiful. Essays and short stories are sort of known for, and I'm putting the air quotes here, but not selling, right? They're
Hmm.
not as easy to sell. That's what people will often say. Essays, short stories,
Hmm.
even memoir, if you're not a celebrity.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious what causes you to just say, I don't care, I'm doing it anyway.
I don't know. It's not the smartest decision in terms of like what will sell, but I guess it's just the art form that I love. It's the form that
Yeah,
I'm just drawn to. And, and obviously they can sell. And there are examples of, collections that sell really well. And I
absolutely.
think it's just, finding your audience and getting it into the right hands and the right publisher. I think it's harder to sell. I think, I think short stories, I think, are a little like harder to read than novels. I think they're sort of because you have to keep going into a new world and keep orienting yourself. And so I think it's like, maybe less people are attracted to them for that reason. I think the only thing harder to read than short stories is poetry, right? So poetry is like really challenging to read. You really have to be present and thinking about it. And, it's not a passive read. It's a more active read, I think.
That's a great point that I hadn't even, because lots of times when you're reading fiction that's really
Mhm.
page turning and you're turning really fast, it is
Yeah.
more passive because the details aren't as important.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
I'm not a fast reader. I mean, I could be I choose not to be a fast reader.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for some things I'm a faster reader than other things. If it's like a
Yeah.
really dense, it's a slower read, a more challenging read.
Well,
So,
I just find that with your pieces, I want to savor them because
mhm.
they are so brief and some are longer than others, but none
Mhm.
of them is
No.
very super long, right?
Hmm.
But I know there's an art to it
Hmm.
because so much goes into each word.
Yeah, it really does.
Do
It's
you
I,
feel
I
that
think like
way?
an ideal short story is not a word is wasted, and everything contributes to the overall effect. So there's not an extra sentence in there, and really not an extra word. So it's really just compressed, you know.
Let's take a quick break.
I want to take a super quick break to ask you, have you ever wondered where authors get great professional mock-ups of their books without spending hours on Photoshop or hiring a designer? In less than 10 seconds, Mockup Shots puts your book into over 1,200 amazing settings. And now, for a limited time, they are including their exclusive video mockup system. Mockup Shots is what I've used for years to create 3D mockups of my own book covers and my author's book covers, as well as professional attention-grabbing images that are great for social media. No technical know-how required. Mockup Shots usually costs over $200, but I have a special offer for you. It's faster, has more features, more images, and is getting better every day. They're celebrating this new and improved Mockup Shots by offering a 60% discount on lifetime access with lifetime updates. It's a great way to get an unheard of price on a product that will get eyes on your book, increased sales, and that you will end up using all the time. You can get this limited time offer with the link in the show notes. And now back to regularly scheduled programming. Does that ever lead you to feel like you're over editing? Like, how do I let it go? Or
I do edit a lot, and my stories do typically take me a long time to write. There are exceptions that sort of came out a little bit more quickly, but I mean, I have short stories in there that I worked on for 5 years, or some of them I would
really?
maybe started 10 years ago and then came back to them. And I had to sort of think about it and live a life and have experiences before I could finish that story. So yeah, it's a slower process, I think, in writing as well.
Did you know? So the title is The Goodbye Process. Did you
Mhm.
know that you wanted all of the stories? Was that what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the
Yeah. I think I had written probably about half of the stories, around half, maybe a little bit less than half, and I realized that they all shared the same theme. And I realized, I guess that's my material. That's what kind of keeps coming up for me is these different losses, these different, ideas of loss, and then I think I wrote towards that after that, and then I wrote the story, The Goodbye Process. It was sort of one of the stories that I wrote later in the process of writing the book, and when I think it's a funeral director says to the main character, you have to release your feelings. It's a very important part of the goodbye process. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, well, that's the title of this story. And then like a minute later, I was like, that's the title of the collection. Like that's what this collection is. And I think that's actually sort of, helped it come together for me, helped me understand what I was writing. And, then I wrote the rest with that in mind.
So how did you determine how many you wanted in total, or when you were finished? How do you decide when you're writing short stories, when you're done?
In terms of the whole book, I mean, I think that a lot of that was something I worked on with my editor. The collection originally had more stories, and slowly over the course of the editorial process, we kind of just cut a lot of things. I mean, that's kind of where my big cuts came in the editorial process, was cutting stories, and we would cut them not because they were, inferior stories or something, but maybe that it was a redundant story. So maybe we didn't need another story that covered this kind of loss, or something. So those a lot of stories got cut in that process. And we just kind of whittled it down until it came to this and fixed the order and, played with that a lot. And then it came to this point, and then it felt like a finished, complete book,
Do you, this is a question that keeps coming up in my community, but around beta readers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with them at all? There's obviously, I probably shouldn't have to preface it, but I will. There's no right or wrong. I'm just curious what everyone's different process is.
I think I'm a unique writer in that I don't really go to beta readers. I like I said, I edit a lot myself. I did write some of these stories, the earlier stories, while I was in my MFA program. And at that time, of course, I had a million beta readers because the stories were workshopped, and I had mentors that would go over them and over them and over them and give me guidance. So those stories were heavily, read before they were finished. But then I think at a certain point, I kind of, I feel like in a way I know how to do that myself. If I put the story aside for a few months and then pull it back out, I feel like I can read it with clean eyes and like be objective. I also teach fiction writing, so I'm skilled at like editing and seeing what a story needs. Of course, getting somebody else's perspective does help, but in my own writing now, I don't tend to go to beta readers. I valued the input from my editor in this process. Jordan Blumetti gave me a lot of really great edits to help the stories get to a better place. Yeah.
So can we talk about your querying and your process for that? How what surprised you about it?
Querying the book or for an agent, or what do you mean?
Let's start with for an agent.
For an agent, I just, I had the book done. I had it to a place where I felt like I couldn't get it. I felt like it was done. I felt like it was as good as I could get it. And then I started reaching out to agents. Of course, as you mentioned, getting an agent to sign a short story collection is even harder because, they know they're going to face challenges when it hits the market. So a lot of agents aren't up for signing short story collections, but I started sending it out, and I had a really good response with a lot of people being interested and wanting to read it. And then, of course, some people said, sorry, I'm just not repping short story collections at this time. I sent it to an agent who's at the agency where I ended up. And she said, I don't rep short story collections, but I do know somebody who does, and she'll love this. Send it to her. So I sent it to her. And I think the next day she called me. She read it and she loved it. And she's like, I want to rep you. So we I went forward with that, and it's been a great relationship.
And how was the going out on submission then for finding a publisher? Was that a long process for you?
It was a long process for me because I got my agent in, I guess, the one thing that surprises me about the publishing process is how slow it is. like, it's all just so slow. It's like, and I've been submitting stories and publishing stories for 20 years.
Yes.
So I know that it's slow, but I didn't know how slow book publishing was. So when I got the agent, it kind of took her a while to read it and give her critiques. And then I got her in 2019. And then by 2020, when the collection was finally ready.
Happened in 2020.
Yeah. When the collection was finally ready to go out, the pandemic came. And so then she smartly said, let's hold this. Let's not go out with it because nobody's buying. Like, I think it's not long into the pandemic. I think the publishing industry kind of shut down a little bit. People were leaving, their offices, and there was just a lot of transitions. And so we held it for a long time. It was finished. I mean, the collection's been finished since 2018 or something. And here we are, So, so she held it for a while. And then when she felt like it was ready, she started going out with it. And she kind of did a mix of going out to more traditional publishers and going to indies at the same time. And it was kind of the same thing with Zibby Books. When we got to them, they responded right away. So it's like, I feel like when it's good news, it happens fast. That's been my experience. I think the day after she went to Zibby Books, she emailed and said, oh, we got to, they want to have a call with you. And this is so exciting. And, we didn't know if they were going to acquire it, but we knew they were interested. And then they did ultimately acquire it.
Yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with Zibby Books. I've yet to read anything. This isn't a challenge, by the way, but I've yet to read anything published by them that I don't love.
Yeah, they're doing a great job. I've loved all their books too.
Well, and they're such a uniquely collaborative team as well. Like everyone I talk to who works with them just feels like part of a team, like a
community. I just got off of a Zoom call with the entire team that works at Zibby Books and all the authors, like from the first one to the new acquires. And it was an hour-long meeting where we were just sort of chatting and saying hi. So it is wonderful. And I've made a lot of close friendships through that community because there are retreats and stuff. And, there's a lot of, I'm in LA. There's a lot of Zibby Books writers that are in LA. Of course, the bookshop. So I'm, hanging out over there a lot.
I'm so envious. Every time I see there's something new going on, I'm like,
there's always something going on over there.
Yeah, this would be a lovely, technically I can drive over 5 hours or so, but it's far, it's a little different when you can just get there. And although it might take you, being in LA, it could legitimately take you 5 hours to get
for a
there.
6 o'clock event. I have to leave my house at 4 because otherwise I just can't guarantee I'm going to get there, especially in rush hour. So it's not around the corner.
I think it's happening everywhere, though. I got a message this morning from one of my doctors. I have a doctor's appointment later in the week, and their message now, when they confirm, says there is a heightened level of traffic in the valley, and so please leave. This is our cancel. This is our late fee policy. It's like everyone has to. My appointment's on Friday. I'll leave in 5 minutes. Type of. That's how I feel. It's thing. So how long between them acquiring the book and, it's not out yet. It comes out,
3 weeks.
I was doing the math. I'm looking at the calendar here.
Yeah. From when they acquired it, that was pretty slow too. That was, they acquired it in spring of 2022.
Okay.
So, and now it's been like 2.5 years.
A little over,
Yeah. So that's been
what do you do in the meantime while you're waiting for the one to come out? Do you start working on other things? Do you start working on another book?
Yeah, I'm working on other things. I'm writing other things. I have another, defiantly another short story collection in the works. This one is a novel and story. So it's a little bit more closely linked with the same characters reoccurring in, lots of the stories. Okay. And then I also have a novel going. But we won't talk about that. So I'm working on other things. But it's also very distracting because there's a lot going on with the book. There's always some news or some edits or something coming in. So I don't know. Some writers, I think, get a lot done in this time, but it has been distracting for me. So I haven't been as productive just because there's so much sort of excitement and there's there's so much anticipation and there's so many, different things constantly happening. So
that was an interesting novel in story. I don't feel like I've heard that. So tell me how that works. How's that? For you, how that works. How is that different from a novel?
You read, by any chance, it won the Pulitzer Prize, but Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge?
No.
That's, I think, probably the most famous recent example of a novel in stories.
Okay.
It's just, it's just the same character is sort of, for that book, the same character is in every story. She pops up. It's this older woman named Olive, and she pops up in every story in some capacity. And some of the stories are about her. And then other stories, she's just a peripheral character that kind of maybe passes through a restaurant and says hi to the person the story is about. And so, they can be either really closely linked where you're following the same plot and it's all the same characters, or it can be, just like that, where the character's just passing through. I do have recurring characters in the goodbye process too. In some of the stories they pop up, but they're not in all of the stories. So
it reminds me a little bit of how sometimes novelists will breadcrumb their characters from one story to the next. So that they're not in the second story, or they'll make a reference to something from the first book. Maybe it's not even a character, but it's.
I love that.
I do too.
It's so exciting when that happens and I know the reference, or I already know this character, and it's so exciting to see them again. So I really do love that. Yeah. It's like,
but that's such a great testament to, and in your story, is it absences or absence? I'm not staring
absences.
at it. Right. That's what I thought. Okay. In absences, I mean, I feel like I know those two girls, and you did that in, I want to say 8 pages.
I think that one's a little longer. I don't know how many printed pages it is. I think in a Word document it was, I feel like it was closer to 20, but maybe it's
okay. Maybe it was longer than it felt like.
Yeah,
I just kept turning pages.
But yeah, I think it's, kind of really getting into their minds, or, maybe the narrator's mind. And I think you can feel like you get to know them very quickly if you have the right details, I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
In
the book?
It's like asking somebody their favorite.
I know. Who's your favorite child? Right?
I love all the stories in the book, and I think the book ended up with just sort of my best stories in it, and so I'm happy with them all. I think for me, the story Realtor was a breakthrough for me as a writer. It's the only story. I think I started out that story with absolutely no idea where it was going. I just had the idea that I was interested in a sort of handsome, like Los Angeles real estate agent who was very obsessed with his looks and his beauty. And so I had that idea in my head, and then I just started writing, and it went in such surprising places. And then I realized I needed a second point of view character, which is not something I do all the time. So I introduced another point of view character. And so I feel like technically like that was a breakthrough for me. And I just love where it ended up. It was so surprising to me. And I feel like I've heard it's surprising for the reader. So I'm very proud of that story. I also really like On the Other Side of the Yard, which is a more compact story. That one's probably, 5 or 6 pages. And I feel like that one, there's not a word wasted in that story. I feel like everything in there needs to be in there. And I like the very short story, The Father. Those are probably my 3, favorites.
I really like what you said about one of the stories maybe being one of your, again, air quotes, favorites, because of how you grew while you were writing it. Like, would you call it a breakthrough story for you?
I do feel like it was a breakthrough for me. I do feel like I don't know. I feel like I kind of came to a new place after writing that story. It was challenging. It's one of the longer stories. And it was just, like I said, surprising. Like I like the quote, which is no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader.
Yes.
So I always like when my stories surprise me, and I'm like, whoa, like I thought this story was done, and then something compelled me to keep working on it, and it went into such an unexpected place, and I like when that happens. It's exciting for me, and I feel like it's a triumph, when I can go in a direction I didn't expect. I feel like then the story is really working, and I'm not controlling it tightly, and it's kind of its own thing,
So then do you because this is interesting. I would have thought that if you're writing short stories, you'd be more, not you, but a person, a writer would be more of a plotter because it's short. So it's like, okay, we start here and we go here. Are you still more of a pantser, or do you vacillate?
Yeah, no, I don't really plot. I don't think I ever plotted. And working on the novel, my mind is more working like that to plot, because I feel like I need to kind of know, so big, and it's like I need to know where it's going. But with a short story, I usually am kind of working around one moment that sticks in my mind, or like some moment that I have an image in my mind, and I'm writing towards that. And so I really don't usually, I'll have an idea of where it's going. But I don't know where it's going, and I don't know how it's going to get there, so no, I don't plot it.
Okay.
And if it goes in another direction, like I said, like I'm happy, and I like when that happens.
Is that something you've learned to do? Just kind of let it be? One thing I was talking about yesterday was this notion of like, when you write a book, there are going to be detours. Just expect it. So the analogy that I gave was, if I'm in Phoenix, and I am, and I'm going from the West Valley into the city, almost inevitably, I'm going to get taken off the highway where I don't expect to and then put back on. So if I just expect that to be the case, it's a lot easier to deal with than if I don't expect it to be the case. But I think sometimes when we're writing books, we don't expect the detour. We don't expect the moment of, well, now wait, what do I know what I'm saying? What am I saying? Or where is this story going?
Yeah.
And it can trip people up to feel like they're not good at, they shouldn't be writing. So how have you learned, or has it just always been something that you've been able to do, to just be curious about, maybe this is going somewhere different than I thought?
Yeah, I think I have learned. I think probably when I was, a newer writer, it would probably scare me a little bit more if it was going somewhere. Oh, well, I thought I was writing a story about this, and it's gone here. And I think I have learned to embrace that and let it go where it wants to go. And it does always go. It does seem to like always go in an unexpected place that I wasn't planning. So I think that's part of the mystery of writing, like in your unconscious mind. And why did it go there? I wasn't expecting that. And it can stop you if you're too hyper aware of it, or you're too rigid and you have to, but I think it's a more powerful story when it's coming from that place, in my experience. So.
Well, and you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that you had some stories that took, years to write. Did you have to step away from them for a minute, or was it just a coincidence, which I don't believe in, but that you got distracted into something else?
One of those stories was The Goodbye Process, which is the title story and the final story in the book. I started writing that story a long time ago. I don't know at this point, over 10 years ago, maybe over 15 years ago. Wow. Probably about that long ago. And I was at a residency actually in Arizona, the University of Arizona Poetry Center. And it was a wonderful residency. I was trapped in a room for a month. And I started writing this story. And I had like a little chunk of it done. And then I think I just always liked it, and I wanted to come back to it. But I think and it wasn't called that at this point. It wasn't called The Goodbye Process. That came later. But I think for this story, I think I didn't have the emotional truth. I think I hadn't gone through, without getting into too much detail, but I hadn't gone through a serious loss like the narrator in that story has gone through. And I think I wasn't writing from a place of emotional truth. And so when I came back to it, like all these years later, of course, I was a different person, and I had gone through my experiences in my life. And then I could write that story, and it came easily. I didn't have the same loss that narrator had, but I understood his loss more, so it had an emotional truth that I wasn't ready to write it when I started it all those years ago.
Well, I think sometimes we can sort of write ourselves into a dead end of sorts. Like we write ourselves into a place where, even if it's our own narrative, even if it's memoir, our own personal story, we realize, I don't know enough about how I feel about this, or this story hasn't fully played out yet enough to be writing about it. So I need to let it play out a little more, or I need to get some more insight into my own feelings about it before I keep going.
Yeah, I definitely think that's happened for me a lot in my life. I have a lot of stories that were started a long time ago, and then I come back to,
and then you come back later. Yeah.
I actually think that's the answer for me. That has been like the answer for writer's block. if I am really blocked and I'm like not functioning as a writer, I think it really does help me to go back to one of the last story that I was working on that I didn't finish and finish it, no matter how bad it is or how terrible it is. If I finish that last story, then I can get past the block and I can go on to live my life and do
do you feel like it's subconsciously blocking you? Is that's the thing that's
I feel like sometimes there's resistance and almost sometimes like I think if you're on the verge of one of those breakthroughs or if you're going to get to a better point in your writing, there's some kind of resistance inside that doesn't want you to, you know what I mean? That stops you. And I think if you push past that and you let it happen, then you're in a different place when you're done. So
even if it's air quote awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
You have to let go of expectations. I think a lot of times when I'm blocked, there's a correlation between what my expectation is for the story and how blocked I am, so if I sit down and write a story and I say, okay, well, this story is going to get in the New Yorker, I'm not going to write a word, but if I just say, oh, this is fun, I'm going to just sit here and play. And I like this idea of this real estate agent. And I don't know why this character keeps coming in my mind. And I'm just playing and I don't have these big expectations or then I think it frees you up.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the amount of pressure that one's putting on themselves for it to be fill in the blank, whatever that is, right?
Yeah, whatever that is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to write this novel and it's going to sell and it's going to win the Pulitzer Prize. Well, then it's going to be very hard to write.
And I have nothing. So will my blank
page.
Zibby wrote her novel about blank, right?
Yeah,
so will my blank piece of paper win me the Pulitzer Prize because, it speaks to something that I can't speak to.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question I ask everybody every time I remember is, what are you reading right now?
Right now, let me think. I'm not sure. I just finished All Forest by Miranda July. I don't know if you've.
Yep.
And I loved it. It was, it was wonderwritingly dirty.
Somebody else recommended
surprising and just her sentences, like her writing on a sentence level is so beautiful, so packed with insight, and just so moving. And I just love that book, and also so laugh out loud funny that I just love it. I love her work. I love all of her work. She's one of my heroes.
I think that's got to be a next up for me because you're the second person who's recommended that.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
It's wild. It's not like it's a wild book, but it's
the other person who said it said the same thing. Like
it's shocking.
It's shocking.
But in a good way.
I mean, with the title, you sort of
you know where that's going.
Yeah, but okay, well,
it's surprising.
I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, I am just wishing you all the best on this release in 3 weeks. And I can't wait to follow along and share and see where you are. Are you doing any kind of
I'm doing a book tour in LA in July. I'll be all around this area. And then in October, I'm going to be on the East Coast in Boston and, Saratoga and I think New York. So we're still working out those details.
Okay.
I'll be around.
Well, I can't wait. And just all the best. I hope we'll get to chat again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So nice talking to you. Thank you
as
for
well.
having me on the show.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, this is your friendly reminder to follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share it with someone you know has a great story or message, but isn't sure what to do next. Also, remember to check out publishaprofitablebook.com for book writing resources and tips, and to see all the ways we can work together to get your book out into the world. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon.